Happy Friday, everyone. Going to be discussing some cannabis reform today with Sal Pace. Hold on, let me get him in here. Hey, Sal, how you doing?
Hi, good morning, Ricardo.
Good. Thanks for joining us. I was going to do a brief introduction just while everyone's logging on here. For those people who may not know who you are, I'm going to give a background about your expertise. We are lucky to have Sal Pace with us today. He's a world-recognized leader in cannabis reform, chairman of the board for the for the Marijuana Policy Project, which is the nation's largest cannabis policy reform organization, handling critical cannabis policy, criminal justice reform, and racial and social justice. Notably, he's a former member of the House of Representatives for Colorado from 2008 until 2012. He was also Pueblo County Commissioner from 2013 to 2018. During his time in the General Assembly, Pace played a leading role in developing Colorado's medical marijuana model, earning him recognition as the face of regulation in the news media at that time. He has served on several policy and legislative interim committees focused on cannabis, and he founded a national organization of local elected officials called Leaders for Reform. As a county commissioner, Sal has led efforts to create the Institute of Cannabis Research at Colorado State University and established the first college scholarship program funded by cannabis tax revenue. He currently serves on the board of the Institute of Cannabis Research. He's also an advisory board member for HeadCount's Cannabis Voter Project. Sal, as I said before, is widely recognized as one of the nation's most knowledgeable experts on the subject of marijuana policy, and he's here to discuss the ever controversial yet very poignant topic of legislation and legalization of marijuana, facts versus fiction. So again, Sal, thanks for joining us. Really a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Ricardo. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having
Awesome.
me.
Well, we're going to get into it, and just like we talked about yesterday, it's going to be a very simple kind of model. I'm gonna basically state a topic, an issue, and just say fact or fiction, and you kind of explain to everyone, is it fact, is it fiction, and kind of what's the background to kind of support that statement. So we'll start with legalization of marijuana has led to an increase in the overall use of marijuana. Fact or fiction?
This is sort of hard to get at overall. We do know that teen use has remained consistent and hasn't gone up as proponents were some folks were fearful of. We don't want underage kids getting into marijuana before they're old enough to make their own decisions and mature adult decisions. What is interesting is the oldest population, individuals older than 65, as really their use has increased dramatically according to polling and statistics, and has essentially doubled since legalization. There could be a lot of speculation why. A majority of these consumers say that they consume for chronic pain or for sleep. And so it might be a situation of individuals self-medicating, although they're purchasing in the legal marketplace.
Interesting. So just to rehash, since marijuana has become legal, use in the youth population has not gone up dramatically, and use in the older population greater than 65 has.
Yeah, not only has it gone up, it's gone up really fast, really high.
Interesting. Legalization of marijuana has led to an increase in the use of hardcore drugs such as cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine. Fact or fiction?
Fiction. There's been no proof of correlation between marijuana legalization, marijuana use, and some of those hard drugs.
Interesting, because that's a big concern. People use the term gateway drug. You use marijuana, there theoretically is a risk that people are going to go into more hardcore drugs. But according to the data and your experience, that is not the case.
Yeah, no, that's not the case. And there are reports out there that show there's no correlation or between marijuana legalization and increased hard drug use. Where there might be a correlation is in the black market, because if you are purchasing marijuana from someone in the black market who possibly might be selling other items as well, you then have the opportunity to learn about or acquire new substances that you weren't intending to purchase. However, with legalization, the data has shown that there's been absolutely no causation correlation, increased amount of hard drug use with legalization of marijuana.
Very interesting. Legalization of marijuana has led to an increase in violent crimes. Fact or fiction?
That's fiction. There's a Cato Institute report that looked at a number of impacts of marijuana legalization, and amongst states post-legalization, there's been no increased violent crime activity in those states. And in a couple states, I think Maine and Nevada, if I remember correctly, in a couple states, the rate actually decreased. In one case, like 90% violent crime rate, and in another case, like 180% per 100,000 individuals. And in a couple states have gone up as well. And so there's just really no correlation between marijuana consumption or marijuana legalization and violent crime. If there's going to be violence with marijuana, it's most likely going to be in the black market trade, where you might have individuals who are acting in illegal fashion to try to protect their turf or make their sales or whatever might happen. But there's no real correlation between marijuana consumption and violence. In fact, there's actually studies out there showing that people are substantially less violent after having consumed marijuana.
All right, great to hear. Legalization of marijuana has led to an increase in underage use of marijuana. You already said no. And other drugs, including alcohol. Fact or fiction?
The data is not clear on that. There's no reason to believe that there's, on the second piece, there's no, the data is not clear on that, but there's no reason to believe that marijuana legalization is tied to increased alcohol consumption. And as I said previously, teen rates have remained consistent post-legalization in states that have legalized.
Yeah, I mean, that I think was one of the biggest concerns, was looking at the youth and the youth use of these drugs. And it sounds like, based on your vast experience, nothing supports that particular theory. So good to hear. Legalization of marijuana has led to an increase in accidents caused by driving under the influence of marijuana. Fact or fiction?
Fiction. And this is also something in the Cato report that is examined. There's no increased fatality rate in any states where marijuana has been legalized.
Okay, so no increased risk of driving under the influence, according to the data, due to legalization of marijuana.
Yeah, and to be clear, there is an increased number of individuals who have tested positive for marijuana use in states that have legalized, but there's first of all, there's a theory that it's being tested more frequently now because people are looking for it. And then there's also, there's also the potential that it is a replacement for alcohol for some folks. And so there might be people who are smoking marijuana instead of drinking, and that these numbers might not actually mean an overall greater risk to society. Obviously, and as you mentioned, I'm the chair of the Marijuana Policy Project Board, and we're part of U.S. Cannabis Council, and we've just partnered with responsibility.org. And we think it's critically important that people safely consume and they don't go and drive or do other risky behaviors or behaviors that put themselves or others at risk after consuming marijuana. And that's something the marijuana industry feels very strongly about.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like any other, same thing with alcohol, just in moderation and obviously with caution. So marijuana is more dangerous and has more deleterious side effects than alcohol. Fact or fiction?
Fiction. Alcohol kills hundreds of thousands of people every single year just by using it properly. Marijuana has never had an overdose death attributed to it, or there's no toxic response from your body that can lead to your health deteriorating or dying rather from marijuana. And so marijuana is incredibly safer than alcohol.
Okay. Legalization of marijuana can generate tremendous revenue via taxes that can be used for statewide improvements. For example, schools and roads. Fact or fiction?
Fact. I do want to be clear though that it's not a panacea. It's not going to solve any one state's budget problems. Just like tax revenue from alcohol isn't going to solve any one state's budget problems, but it does bring in some substantial money. The state of California in 2020 brought in $1 billion of tax revenue from marijuana sales, and where those dollars are put are really up to the policymakers or the voters if it's voted on a citizens initiative or tax measure. In Pueblo County, when I was a county commissioner, started a program where we provided college scholarships for our high school graduates. That program now has $2 million a year going out in college scholarships directly from marijuana tax revenue, just in the community of Pueblo, Colorado.
I mean, that's good to know. I mean, maybe just expand on that a little bit in your experience in Colorado. You kind of went into a little bit, but it's been legal in Colorado for what now? Almost a decade, correct? Or close to it?
Well, yeah, we passed it in 2012, but it got implemented in January 1st of 2014.
Okay, so about 7 years.
Yeah.
What benefits have you seen at a state level in Colorado due to the taxes on marijuana?
Well, the marijuana tax revenue goes to a really long list of programs, from research to education to school construction funding, specifically in low-income communities, to veterans programming. The marijuana cash fund spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year on programs, and every single thing is spelled out specifically what it's going towards. But the state budget itself, is in the $20 billion range, and hundreds of millions of dollars is nothing to sneeze at. But you're not going to see your state budget, increase by 25% year over year, just because it's any state or any community's budget is so much more substantial than just one substance.
Great to hear. Legalization of marijuana significantly reduces the power and revenue of drug cartels and criminal enterprises. Fact or fiction?
Fact. There's not going to be the smuggling or the violent activities or the power of the Mexican drug cartel, and people who consume marijuana, your viewers, might remember, a decade ago there was such a thing as Mexican brickweed that existed in the United States. That was marijuana that would be all clumped together, and it would have seeds and stems in it. People pick out their seeds before they smoke their marijuana. That's pretty much gone, and all of that product was coming from Mexico, and so that is a revenue stream that the cartels in Mexico have lost. And that's a lot of money. Right now in the legal marketplace in Colorado, we're talking about $20 billion in annual sales. And marijuana sales is going to, and we've only scratched the surface of the states that have implemented full legalization. So it's going to grow, and marijuana sales the legal marketplace will get in the $75 to $100 billion range in the United States, which will put it on par with coffee and alcohol. And that's a lot of money that's out of the black market.
Yeah. Have you guys seen any backlash from the Mexican cartel? I mean, I would assume that anytime you're taking money from the Mexican cartel, there's going to be either pushback or they're going to try to get involved in some of the policy making, backdoor ways. Has there been any pushback?
No. I mean, I've heard that Mexico has voted, the country of Mexico has voted to legalize marijuana, and I've heard that the cartel played a role in negotiating the legalization legislation with the Mexican Senate. I don't know that as a fact. I wasn't involved in implementing anything in Mexico. I will say what is a concern that comes up amongst the marijuana activist community, and something that I have some of my own qualms about, are communities such as some in Northern California, or in Oregon, or in other parts of the United States, where a large number of Americans for decades have been growing marijuana, usually without any violence or harm or causing any damage to their local community. But some of these communities really have relied on outdoor marijuana cultivation and the black market trade for a long time. And what's going to happen to some of these communities that have relied on marijuana cultivation for decades? And that's something that's not really talked a lot about in sort of the legalization movement. But it's a real concern.
Yeah. Ending marijuana prohibition in the U.S. is one of the most effective ways to address social justice issues. Fact or fiction?
Fact. Absolutely. Black Americans are 4 times more likely to be arrested and incarcerated for marijuana than white people. And white people and black people smoke marijuana at the exact same rate. But if you're black or you're brown or indigenous, you are far more likely to be arrested and incarcerated for marijuana. There are still 40,000 people behind bars today for marijuana, and hundreds of thousands still being arrested every year in this country. And often it is, it's the smell of marijuana coming from a car that initiates an arrest or an officer pulling over a car that sometimes things can go badly, and just because someone is consuming marijuana, although you shouldn't be consuming while you're driving, does not necessitate that they are a bad person. And if we really want to work on criminal justice reform, this is really the tip of the spear. Marijuana is the entree for so many police interactions in the inner city.
So let me go over those numbers again. So according to the data, blacks and whites use marijuana roughly at the same rate, yet blacks are 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana use than a white person.
Correct.
Shocking. That's shocking and also very disturbing.
Yeah.
Okay. Marijuana prohibition is similar to the alcohol prohibition that existed in the early 1900s. Fact or fiction?
I would say fact. We had a substance that was in the black market and being trafficked, with some illicit gangs and cartels, and now it's tested and it's taxed and it's regulated, and so I think it's fairly similar.
And do you think it's only a matter of time before it becomes completely mainstream, just like alcohol? Like no one obviously has a problem with someone having a glass of wine at dinner. Obviously not the same yet with marijuana. Do you think that's only a matter of time before marijuana becomes mainstream, just like alcohol took years and potentially decades to become mainstream?
I, you know, I'm I couldn't speculate on that. I figured that we had some more mainstream attitudes by now in Colorado, and it hasn't changed that quickly. That said, perceptions on marijuana have changed. On legalization has changed really quickly in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Legalization of marijuana will allow corporate America to turn the marijuana industry into big tobacco 2.0. Fact or fiction?
I think fiction. There's a big difference between big tobacco, um, and marijuana. Tobacco kills 480,000 people a year. By using it properly. Marijuana, using it properly, does not cause any overdose deaths. It is not toxic to your body. It doesn't kill you. And to big tobacco 50 years ago was arguing that tobacco was healthy and good for you, and it was something that should be consumed to help you out. Conversely, even though there's been a lot of research over the years showing that marijuana can be helpful for pain and PTSD and a host of other conditions. The federal government spent decades trying to prove that marijuana was harmful to people.
How do you regulate advertising? So, for example, people are worried that many of the marijuana companies, once it's legal in certain states, are going to be targeting youths. How do you regulate advertising? And just like big tobacco used to target youth, how do you control advertising and marketing?
Yeah, so most states have put in regulations around advertising and marketing, to try to uh, prevent advertising to be focused towards youth. It varies in different states, where you can market, how you can market, what you can say, but pretty much every state has some sort of marketing along those lines. And to be honest, marijuana businesses really don't have to be introducing people to marijuana. Tobacco is a little different. You have to start to get addicted to it, and once you're hooked, you're going to keep smoking it your whole life. That's part of the model. Um, there's already marijuana consumers that exist. There are people who are interested in consuming, and the advertising is really intra industry as opposed to trying to introduce marijuana to people.
So talk a little bit about the addictive properties of marijuana versus other drugs. You just mentioned nicotine, alcohol, more hardcore drugs.
Yeah, nicotine, alcohol, caffeine, all have all can have a physical addiction to it. There's not a proven physical addiction to marijuana. There are people who are psychologically, mentally addicted to consuming marijuana. Um, but there's no withdrawal symptoms, physical withdrawal symptoms that you would have with heroin or cigarettes or alcohol that you can have with marijuana. It can, you can be mentally.
Okay, got you. The majority of Americans believe marijuana should be legalized. Fact or fiction?
Fact. The numbers have increased dramatically in recent years. It's up to 68% of Americans think that marijuana should be legalized. I saw a poll in Utah last week that had it at 72% in Utah, which I believe is the most Republican state in the United States. And so the overwhelming majority of Americans believe it should be legalized, taxed, regulated, and taken out of the hands of the black market.
What do you attribute that rise in acceptance rate over the last decade? Is that science? Is it data? Is it marketing? Is it experience? All the above?
Well, I also think that legalization and people having seen it firsthand, and then and also whether it be first medical and then rec, that people have recognized that it hasn't been as bad or dangerous as people have thought. In addition, there's starting to be new research out there that indicates that marijuana has a number of medical properties that can be helpful, and as people learn about the potential for marijuana, whether it's pain or sleep or a long list of other reasons, I think people are just a little more open to it.
Great to hear. Last question, actually. Marijuana will become legal in all 50 states within the next 10 years. Fact or fiction?
I think that it'll be really close to all 50 states, if it's not all 50 states. The voters in Mississippi, 72% of the voters in Mississippi in 2020 passed the medical marijuana program. The Supreme Court struck it down, but I think the legislature will probably re-implement it. Alabama just passed a medical program. Louisiana came really close to passing recreational this year. And these are the deep South states. So I think 10 years is not that far, or I don't think it's that impossible a number or date.
And just tell us a little bit about your role as the chairman of the largest, marijuana policy group. What is your role in kind of pushing that legislation and educating the public as to the benefits of marijuana?
Well, the Marijuana Policy Project is a 26-year-old organization with a really fabulous track record of success across the country. I believe it's 11 of the 15 recreational states we wrote the laws for, and I think 13 of the medical marijuana states we wrote the laws for. And so we've run a number of ballot initiatives. We have a really robust legislative campaign throughout the states, working to educate lawmakers and building coalitions and trying to bring stakeholders together to pass good common sense legislation. We also were part of a new organization that includes all the largest marijuana industry companies in the United States called U.S. Cannabis Council, and we're working as part of U.S. Cannabis Council. It's a collaboration between MPP and industry. Marijuana Policy Project, MPP, we are a advocacy organization, but this new collaboration is focused on federal reform, and from everything working with Senator Schumer in his office to Congressman Earl Blumenauer of Oregon in his office, trying to work through some common sense federal reform and legislation. And so I feel really blessed to get the opportunity to work on exciting and fun policy areas as the chairman of the board of the Marijuana Policy Project. And if people want to learn more, we're at mpp.org. and you can sign up for news alerts for your particular state, or just check out a long list of different policy papers and information on our website.
Yeah, I mean, it's really incredible what you've been able to do, at that group. Based on all your history back in Colorado, you've kind of been one of the pioneers for this progression. Very impressive how you've really moved the needle ahead. Again, thanks for all you do, Sal. Thanks for educating all of our audience. Thanks for your time. Very impressive initiative you've put together, and your entire group. So again, kudos to you guys.
Thanks, Ricardo. Thanks for having me.